They tell you 20 years on the force prepares you for anything. Homicide, riots, the kind of things that curdle a civilian's blood. For us, it's just another Tuesday. You build a wall inside you, a thick concrete barrier between the job and the man. You have to. But last night something tunneled right through that wall. It didn't just knock it down, it dissolved it. And now I can't tell where the job ends and the screaming begins. It all started with a sound on a 911 open line, a sound that technology had no business capturing. My name is Officer Miller, badge number 734. I've been a cop in this city for 2 decades. I've delivered babies in the back of my cruiser, and I've held the hands of men as the life drained out of them on dirty asphalt. I thought I had seen the full, ugly spectrum of the human condition. I was wrong. I was a child. We all are. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. A ghost call. No one on the line, just static. Standard procedure is to hang up after 10 seconds, but dispatch stayed on. Why? Because buried in the hiss, there was something else, a rhythm, a soft, wet, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a drum made of mud and meat, and underneath it, a whisper, a high, thin sound like a child trying to sing a lullaby through a throat full of water. The call pinged to a location that made my coffee go cold. 1121 Blackwood Lane. I'd been on the force 20 years, and I'd never heard of it. I ran the address. No record. My partner for the night, a fresh-faced kid named Evans, who still thought a badge made him invincible, he ran it on his terminal. Same result. The street didn't exist. "Probably a glitch, old-timer," he'd said, grinning. "GPS spazzing out. Probably some drunk's butt dial." But dispatch was spooked. The supervisor, a woman named Carol, who'd been taking calls since before I made detective, got on the radio herself. Her voice was tight. 734, be advised. The tech guys are saying the GPS signal is stable. It's a hardline ping, triangulated. That address is real. It's coming from the old Sterling Industrial Park. The Sterling Park. Of course. That place wasn't a street. It was a scar. A sprawling tetanus trap of rust and broken glass out by the river docks that the city had condemned and tried to forget 30 years ago. They said the cleanup costs were too high, something about chemical contamination in the soil. So they just walled it off, put up chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and pretended it wasn't there. The city maps were literally redrawn to exclude it. No one went in, nothing came out. "All right, dispatch," I said into the radio, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. 734 is en route. ETA, 10 minutes. Evans was practically vibrating in the passenger seat. For him, this was an adventure, a spooky, abandoned factory, a real-life horror movie. For me, it was just a headache, a paperwork nightmare waiting to happen. Transients, probably. Maybe a kid fell and hurt himself. But that sound, that wet, rhythmic sound, it didn't fit.
The drive was quiet. The city's neon glow faded behind us, replaced by the sickly yellow of sodium streetlights on empty roads. The Sterling Park fence was exactly as I remembered it from my rookie days, when old-timers would tell stories about it. A 10-foot-tall wall of chain link, sagging in places, tattooed with graffiti that was decades old. The main gate was chained and padlocked, with a lock so old and rusted it looked like a chunk of iron ore. Someone had been here recently, though. A section of the fence to the left of the gate had been cut open, a neat, precise flap, bent inwards. I killed the headlights, but left the engine running. The silence that rushed in was absolute. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. It was like the entire area was holding its breath. "I'll take point," Evans said, his hand already on his Glock. The eagerness in his voice scraped on my nerves. "You'll stay right behind me, kid," I grunted, pulling out my own service weapon and a heavy maglite. "Keep your radio chatter to a minimum, eyes open." We slipped through the cut in the fence. The air inside was different. It was heavy, thick with the smell of rust, damp earth, and something else, something vaguely organic and sweet like meat left too long in the sun. Every step crunched on gravel and shattered glass. The beam of my flashlight cut a nervous path through the darkness, illuminating skeletal structures of warehouses and factory buildings. They were like the rib cages of long-dead giants, silhouetted against a starless, overcast sky. The GPS on my phone was still active, a little blue dot pulsing over a gray, featureless void on the map. It was leading us toward the largest building in the center of the complex, a massive, windowless brick behemoth that must have been the main assembly plant. The tag on the map simply read 1121. So Blackwood Lane wasn't a street. It was a building. As we got closer, I started to hear it again, faintly, not through the radio, but with my own ears. Thump, thump, thump. It was a bass note I felt in my teeth. Evans heard it too. He slowed, his bravado finally starting to flake away, replaced by a cautious tension. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "Don't know," I said, my voice low. "Doesn't matter. We find the source, we figure out who needs help, we get out." The main entrance to Building 1121 was a set of massive loading bay doors, one of which was slightly ajar, hanging crooked on its rails, a dark, gaping maw that promised nothing good. The rhythmic thumping was louder now, echoing from within, and I could hear the other sound too, that high, watery whisper. It wasn't a lullaby. It sounded like words, but they were twisted, spoken in a language that scraped at the edges of my sanity. It was a sound that logic couldn't place, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to get back in the cruiser and drive until the sun came up. But there was a job to do. There was a person who might need help. That's the line we tell ourselves. It's the line that keeps us moving forward when every cell in our body is screaming to run. I pushed the heavy door open a little wider. It groaned in protest, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The beam of my maglite pierced the darkness inside, and what it revealed made the blood in my veins turn to ice.
The factory floor was enormous, a cavern of concrete and steel. But it wasn't empty. In the center of the vast space, directly under the leaking, rotten-toothed skylights, was a pile. It was a mound of stuff. Scraps of metal, old furniture, mannequin parts, animal bones, and heaps of black, foul-smelling earth, all piled together in a crude 20-foot-high hill. And on top of that hill was the source of the sound. It was a man. Or it had been. He was sitting cross-legged, his back to us. He was unnaturally thin, his spine a knotted rope visible through a filthy, tattered shirt. He was holding something in his hands, something he was methodically raising and bringing down onto a large, flat stone in front of him. Thump. He lifted it. It was a human arm, severed at the shoulder. The flesh was pale and waxy. Thump. He brought it down again, using the stump as a grotesque hammer. The sound was sickeningly organic, wet and solid. Evans made a gagging sound behind me. I put a hand on his chest, holding him back. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The whispering was all around us now, seeming to come from the very walls, echoing in that vast, dark space. It was a child's voice, but ancient and wrong. "The gears must turn, the flesh must feed the rust, the city sleeps, and we keep the beat." Slowly, as if sensing our presence, the figure on the pile stopped. His head, topped with lank, greasy hair, began to turn. It rotated with a series of quiet, wet clicks like vertebrae grinding together.
It turned, and it kept turning. Past his shoulder, past the point where any human neck should be able to go. It swiveled a full 180 degrees. The face that stared back at us was not a face. It was a mask. A crude, porcelain mask, like something from an old plague doctor's nightmare, but it was fused directly to his flesh. There were no eye holes, just a long, pointed beak and smooth white cheeks stained with something dark. Yet I felt its gaze on me. I felt it see right through my skin, right through my 20 years of carefully constructed walls, and into the terrified core of me. Then it spoke, not with the whispering voice, but with a voice that came from its chest, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor. The clock is broken, but the factory must not stop. We are the new parts, the replacement crew. Behind the mask, from where its mouth should have been, a thick, black fluid like crude oil began to leak down its chin and onto its chest. It dropped its gruesome hammer and stood up, its joints popping and clicking in protest. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its limbs were elongated, stretching as it rose like warm toffee being pooled. "You're late for your shift," it rumbled, and took a lurching step off the pile of debris. That was it. That was the moment my 20 years of training evaporated. Fight or flight, and there was no fighting this thing. "Run!" I screamed at Evans. I didn't have to say it twice. We turned and scrambled out of that hellish factory, the sound of its long limbs dragging on the concrete behind us. We didn't stop running until we burst back through the cut in the fence, gasping for air that didn't taste of decay and madness. We threw ourselves into the cruiser, and I slammed the pedal to the floor, leaving a cloud of gravel and terror in our wake. I didn't look back, but in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I saw a tall, slender figure standing at the fence line, its white, featureless mask, a pale moon in the darkness. We didn't speak on the ride back to the precinct. What was there to say? How do you write a report about a man with a fused mask for a face who stretches like rubber and uses a human arm as a tool? How do you explain the whispering that came from nowhere and everywhere at once? I dropped Evans off at his car. The kid looked broken. The invincibility was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of someone who has looked into the abyss. "Miller, what was that?" he finally asked, his voice a fragile whisper. I didn't have an answer. I just shook my head and told him to go home, to hug his wife, and to try and forget what he saw. I knew it was a lie. You don't forget something like that. It becomes a part of you. I went back to the station and sat in my car in the empty parking lot for an hour, watching the sun come up. The world looked the same. The sky was blue. The birds were singing. But it was all a lie, a thin veneer over something horrible and ancient. A factory that never stops running, powered by things we aren't meant to see. I filed a report. I called it a prank call. An investigation of an abandoned property that yielded nothing. Vandalism, maybe. I lied. I lied to my sergeant, I lied to the official record, and I lied to myself. Because the alternative was to admit that the world isn't what we think it is. To admit that there are things out there in the dark, forgotten places, things that keep a different kind of time. Things that see us as nothing more than replacement parts for a machine that broke long ago. Last night, I looked behind the curtain, and I'm afraid. I'm afraid because I know that what I saw is still there, in that dark, walled-off part of my city. It's still there, keeping the beat. Thump, 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 and I can still hear it. It's not loud. It's a phantom limb of a sound, an echo imprinted on the inside of my skull, I hear it over the rattle of the cruiser's engine, under my wife's questions about my day. I heard it in the shower this morning, the steady rhythm a perfect counterpoint to the drumming of water on tile. For 20 years, the silence in my own head was my only refuge. Now, that silence is gone. It's been occupied. I tried to work my shift today. I really did. Everything was normal. Traffic stops, a B&E at a laundromat, the usual mundane rhythm of city life. But nothing felt real. The vibrant, chaotic city I had sworn to protect now felt like a painted backdrop, a flimsy stage set. And I kept expecting the paint to peel back and reveal the rust and rot underneath. I saw him everywhere, a tall man in a long coat turning a corner just out of sight, a flash of something pale like a porcelain mask in the reflection of a storefront window. I'd blink, and it would be a plastic bag caught on the wind or a trick of the light, but the jolt of ice in my veins was real every single time. Evans called in sick. I knew he would. His sergeant called me halfway through my shift, asking if the kid was all right. Said he sounded spooked. I covered for him. Said we dealt with some particularly nasty transients, maybe some PCP involvement. Another lie to add to the pile that's getting heavy. When I got home, my wife, Sarah, had made my favorite dinner, pot roast. The smell usually feels the whole house safe. Tonight, it just smelled like cooked meat. I couldn't eat. I pushed the food around my plate until she finally put her fork down, her face a mixture of concern and frustration. "Mark, what is it? You haven't been here since you walked in the door. Talk to me." I looked at her. Her kind eyes, the small lines of worry around her mouth. For 20 years, she's been my anchor, the person who reminded me that there was a world outside of yellow tape and flashing lights. How could I tell her? How could I explain that I think the world is a broken machine and we're all just spare parts waiting to be harvested? How could I describe that thing's face, that lack of a face, without sounding insane?
"Long night," I mumbled. "Just tired." She didn't believe me, but she let it go. She always does. She knows the wall I've built. She just doesn't know that something else is living inside it with me now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. And the sound was there. Thump, thump, thump. Faint, but persistent. It was coming from the basement. I told myself it was the water heater. The house was old. Houses make noises. I repeated it like a mantra. It's the water heater. It's the water heater. But I've lived in this house for 15 years. I know it sounds. This was not one of them. I slipped out of bed, grabbing the heavy metal flashlight I keep on the nightstand. I crept down the stairs, each step a loud creak in the sleeping house. The door to the basement was closed. I stood before it, my heart hammering against my ribs, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. The air that wafted up the stairs was cool and damp, smelling of concrete and mildew. And something else. That faint, sweet, cloying smell of decay from the factory. I swept the beam of the flashlight down the wooden steps. The basement was empty. Just our old washing machine and dryer, shelves of Christmas decorations, and stacks of old boxes. Nothing out of place. But the sound was louder here. Thump, thump, thump. It seemed to be coming from the floor itself, from the concrete foundation. I knelt down, pressing my ear to the cold, gritty surface. The vibration was undeniable. It was coming from deep within the earth beneath my home. Then I saw it, next to the water heater,
In the darkest corner of the basement was a puddle. It wasn't water. It was thick, black, and iridescent like oil. The same black fluid that had leaked from the mask of the creature in the factory. A small viscous pool that hadn't been there yesterday. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. The factory was miles away on the other side of the river, walled off, condemned. It couldn't be here. It couldn't follow me home. My radio, clipped to my belt even when I was off duty, suddenly crackled to life, not with the voice of dispatch, but with that same high, watery voice from the factory. It was clearer now. The pipes are connected. The foundation is weak. The city sleeps, and the rust will creep. I stumbled backward, scrambling up the stairs on my hands and knees like a terrified child. I slammed the basement door shut, fumbling with the lock, my breath coming in ragged, panicked sobs. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, my service weapon on the coffee table, watching the sun come up, listening to a sound that shouldn't be there. The next day, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I went to see Evans. He lived in a neat little suburban house with a white picket fence, the American dream. When he answered the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, darting around nervously. "Miller," he breathed, pulling me inside quickly and shutting the door. "It's happening to you too, isn't it? The sound?" I nodded numbly. "I heard it in my basement." He collapsed on his couch, running his hands through his hair. "It's the TV, the radio. Anytime there's static, I hear the whispering. And last night, my kid's baby monitor, it picked it up, that same watery voice singing. My wife thinks I'm losing my mind." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "We have to do something. We can't just pretend it didn't happen."
Do what, Evans? I shot back, my voice harsher than I intended. File a report? Tell the sergeant we met a monster from a kid's nightmare? They'll take our badges and give us padded rooms. I saw what I saw. You saw what you saw. But we are the only ones. So we just live with this? We let it fester? I didn't have an answer. But I knew he was right. This wasn't going away. It was spreading. Like a contamination. Like the chemicals they said were in the soil at Sterling Park. That's when the idea hit me. An idea so stupid, so against protocol, that only a desperate man would consider it. The city archives. Sterling Park was condemned 30 years ago. There have to be records somewhere. Building permits, closure orders, incident reports. Something to tell us what that place was and why it was so thoroughly erased. It took me 2 days to get the clearance. I had to pull strings I hadn't pulled in a decade, call in favors from cops who were now deputy chiefs. I told them I was working a cold case, a missing person from the 80s whose last known location was near the park. More lies. They were becoming second nature. The city archive was a dusty, climate-controlled tomb in the sub-basement of City Hall. A woman with glasses on a chain and a permanent scowl led me to a section labeled Condemned Properties, 1980 to 1990. It was rows upon rows of gray, anonymous file boxes. "Sterling Industrial is in here somewhere," she said, her voice devoid of interest. "If the records weren't destroyed in the flood of '92, good luck." I spent 6 hours in that room. 6 hours of breathing in the smell of decaying paper, my only light a green-shaded desk lamp. Box after box was filled with boring municipal paperwork, zoning variances, asbestos abatement reports, tax liens. I was about to give up when I found it. A single thin file folder at the bottom of a box, mislabeled as Sterilizer Project. Inside was a handful of documents related to the Sterling Industrial Park. Most of it was standard stuff. But then I found the incident reports. There were 3 of them,
all from the final week before the park was officially shut down. They were from the private security firm that patrolled the grounds. The first detailed a worker who had a psychotic break, claimed the machines were whispering to him. He was found trying to feed a stamping press with his own hand. The second report described another worker who walked off the job and vanished. They found his hard hat and tools neatly stacked next to a vat of industrial solvent. He was never seen again. The final report was the one that made my blood run cold. It was a frantic, almost incoherent call from a security guard on the night shift. He was reporting a riot in Building 1121. He said the workers weren't human anymore. He said they were changing, their bodies stretching, their faces melting. He screamed about a tall man with a beak. The last entry was a single sentence. Unit 3 unresponsive. Dispatch sending city police. Line disconnected. Tucked behind that report was a single grainy black and white photograph. It was a picture of a group of men in suits standing in front of what looked like a strange, intricate piece of machinery inside the factory. In the center of the group was a man who looked out of place. He was tall and gaunt, wearing a dark, old-fashioned suit. His face was a pale, emotionless blur. Even in the old photo, it looked like a mask. Underneath, a caption was typed, "Mr. Sterling and the Board of Directors, with the project's chief chronometrician, 1954.
Chief chronometrician, a keeper of time. The clock is broken, the thing in the factory had said. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the file. It was Evans. His voice was a panicked squeak. "Miller, turn on the news. Channel 4, now." I didn't have a TV, but I pulled up the news station's live stream on my phone. The lead story was a traffic jam on the I-5 bridge. A man had abandoned his car in the middle of traffic and was standing on the railing, looking down at the river. The newscaster was filming from a distance, but I could see him. He was tall. He was wearing a long, dark coat. And as the camera zoomed in, my breath hitched in my throat. He was wearing a white, porcelain mask with a long, pointed beak. He turned his head slowly, looking directly at the news chopper, as if he knew it was there. And then he just stepped off the railing. He didn't fall, he didn't plummet, he just descended. He floated down toward the dark water as gracefully as a falling leaf until he was swallowed by the river. The newscaster was babbling, confused, talking about a possible stunt or a trick of the camera. But I knew it wasn't a trick. The contamination was spreading. The replacement crew was leaving the factory, and they were looking for new parts. My city was the new machine, and the beat was getting louder.